Alright, howdy. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I don't usually do a lot of setups in these videos, but I do my own setups, almost all my own guitar work really at this point. Just kind of as a natural progression of the fact that I've got a lot of guitars and they always need something done to them. So over the years I have learned to do different things, picked up the right tools. But I think everybody pretty much ought to be able to do what I'm going to show you today. If you're a serious player, you ought to know enough about how your guitar works to know how to make some just adjustments to make it play right. So I'm going to go over kind of the different things that affect whether the guitar plays in tune and whether the strings buzz. And all of this is stuff that's pretty easily available elsewhere. There are some really good setup channels on YouTube that talk about how all this stuff works. But I get a lot of questions from friends, from fellow players, that want to know why their strings buzz, want to know why their strings cut out. One guy, and the reason that I decided to make this video now is a friend of mine has a guitar and he has tens on it and just went to tuning down half a step. And he noticed he was getting a lot of buzz on his strings when he was playing them open and didn't know why. His statement to me was, I changed the strings and I tuned down and I got a lot of buzz, but I looked and it didn't look like my neck relief was any different. And that's kind of looking to see if a fuse is blown. It doesn't really work that way. You've got to measure it somehow. So I'm going to go over the stuff that affects whether the guitar strings buzz and whether they play in tune and how easy they are to play. The first thing is going to be the nut. This is one of those things that if this isn't right, you're just fighting everything else as you go. So whether you do it yourself or whether you take it to somebody to have it done, the thing to know about a nut is that you want it to hit the balance of being just deep enough that when you fret this first note, it doesn't go sharp, and when you fret it, play it open, it doesn't buzz too much. So there is a balance there. I find that it's kind of roughly equal, about half the width of this thickness, this thickest string. So in this case, this is a 42. So I'm going to want around 21 thousandths or so is a good starting point for the distance between this string and this fret. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. One is to measure this height of this fret with a caliper or a depth gauge, and then add half of the width of the string, and that will tell you how deep these nut slots need to be. There are other more interactive ways to do it. The way that I usually do it is I will have a test to see if I can fit, this is kind of my field test, see if I can fit a guitar pick in there and it'll stay. If it won't, I know the nut slot's way too high, but it's not very scientific. So, but that's always my first clue, is if I can't stick a pick in there like I do and I'm going to put it in the stand and set it down without the pick falling out, then I know it's way too high. And you will, especially when you go to do chords like a C, you will hear these first fret notes being super sharp, and nothing stands out worse than a sharp C note on a chord. It'll be like, I can kind of simulate that here. If I push that one way too hard, you can hear it right away. Also, if you're hitting this string and it's just going zzz, 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 then you know you've got the nut slots too low. So the thing about this is it's not rocket science to do that measuring. You do need some tools, but you absolutely do have to have the right kind of files to cut those nut slots. I've got a cheap set here that are Hosco's. They're one width on one side and one width on the other. So this one is 46 and 17. This one is 36 and 13. This one is 26 and 10. And what you want is, if you're using nines on the guitar, you want this slot here to be just a hair bigger. But if you don't have these frets, these files here, don't try this yourself. I have spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars over the years collecting up little tools for this part of the guitar, that part of the guitar, crowning files, a lot of very specialized stuff. If you don't have it, that's okay, but you probably want to have this part done. Take it to the guitar shop, or if you've got an actual luthier locally that'll work on it, do that. But get this part right first. The next thing that will make a big difference in how the guitar plays and whether it's playing in tune and how much it's buzzing is going to be the neck relief, and that's this here. Your neck, if it's properly adjusted, has just a little bit of an inward curve. And what that does is it allows the strings not to hit the frets above them, especially in the middle as you're fretting. If it's too much of a bow the other way, then what will happen is these will sound okay, but these up here will buzz a lot when you go to pick on them. And usually the right amount of relief is very subjective. It's going to be a balance between what makes the guitar play in tune and what makes it easy to play, and what causes the least buzz, or no more than an acceptable amount of buzz. And acceptable is it's a very much of a judgment call as far as what's good for you versus somebody else. So where I like to go, and you can look at any guitar site and the manufacturer's site will tell you what's their factory set relief to start with. People ask all the time, what's the right relief? And there is no right relief, but you can have somewhere to start from and say, I think I want it a little bit flatter, I think I want it a little bit rounder. But if you've got that factory setting to start from, that gives you somewhere to go. PRS will give you a whole different measurement at a whole different point than what Fender does. Fender usually says that you want to have about 12 thousandths here at the 7th fret if you're fretted on 17 and 1. And what I used to do before I measured anything, and I really only started measuring stuff when I did other people's guitars so that I could see what they had so that I could put it back, is I would fret about on the 17th fret here, fret on the 1st fret here, and then tap about the 7th fret. And you can probably see or hear that. There's a little bit of motion there, but I'm not having to push very hard to get that down there. If you got a capo, that'll make it even easier to do. You can just kind of capo the 1st fret, take that one hand out of your way, fret on the 17th fret, and then slide this gauge up in here. And this has actually got a tiny bit more relief than I would like. Now, if I'm being really scientific about this, and if I'm working on somebody else's guitar, I'm going to be real careful to be doing this in the playing position. I know for me, I don't need it to be that precise, and this is a maple neck which bends a lot less than a mahogany or rosewood neck, so I know this is going to be close enough. And I will just crank it a little bit. Does not take a lot with these fretboards, especially the maple ones. By all means, make sure you've got the right wrench for this, by the way. You don't want to have one that has a lot of slop in there. You want it to fit pretty nice. This is an example. I left these all out to show you how many I had to go through before I found the one that fit this nut, because Mexican uses a different size than American, and they both use a different size than Japanese-made guitars, even if they're all Fenders. Sometimes the Fenders even use the same size as the US-made ones, which makes things really confusing. But the point is to make sure you got the right one. I've got a huge collection of these from messing with different guitars over the years, owning different guitars over the years. So now that I've made that adjustment there, I'm going to check it one more time. Just give it a second. And now see, it's just a little bit, now I can actually feel the gauge hit both surfaces. So now I've got that about where I want it, and it's got just a little bit less movement. But even without the capo or without a feeler gauge, this will give you a good idea of what's going on. If you do this, and I'm going to fret in the wrong places just to make a point, and you get like, see there's even still like no movement, then you know your neck is a little bit too straight or maybe even back bowed. If on the other hand you get a lot of movement like this, then your neck probably needs a little bit of back bow worked out. But again, some of that is preference, because the straighter the neck is, the more buzz you're going to get as you go up on the neck, especially on the lower strings. But the easier it's going to be to fret down here. So set it as the factory would have you do it, just as a starting point, and then you can decide based on your playing which way you like it, you know, a little flatter or a little curvier. You absolutely have to have these two things right before you get down here to the bridge. I see people all the time giving, you know, advice if there's too much buzzing, just raise your action. Or some people will say just crank the truss rod or loosen the truss rod, and you absolutely don't want to do that just by itself. They are completely interactive, and it is really important that you understand the relationship between the two. Because if you've got a real big bow in your neck, these frets here are going to buzz worse than these ones down here, and you're going to think you need to raise this bridge a lot, and you don't. And in fact, when you do that, you start to throw the intonation off. So you open up a whole big can of worms, and intonation will get to very last because it's very last. But make sure the nut is right first. Adjust the truss rod first, and always do this, by the way, with a new set of the strings you're going to use, because tuned up to pitch, because the string gauge and the tuning and even the brand does make a difference in this adjustment here, especially this neck relief. So once you've got the nut the right height, once you've got the neck relief set right, now you can come down here to the bridge and you can measure the action. I've got in here a ruler that I use. A lot of the guitar shop companies sell these. This one I got off eBay, or not eBay, Amazon. And it has metric and inch depths, and what you do is you put it on the fret and you look at the neck sideways, and this time it's absolutely essential that you're looking at it like this. And measure at, I usually measure at about the 12th fret, because you can measure down wherever, you know, if you're looking up company sites, they're going to tell you a fret to measure at. This is 50 thousandths of an inch at the 17th fret, or about 1.5 millimeters. And that's about where I like it. I like the action pretty low. I don't like it just, you know, imperceptibly low where you can barely play it. But again, that's where that becomes a taste judgment. That one is absolutely changeable depending on what you want to do. And you can do it without a gauge. You can do it just by going here and saying, you know, it's buzzing here, I need to raise it up just a tiny bit. And again, make sure you've got these adjustments right first, because this can be misleading if you don't. You know, if it's buzzing a little bit, you can raise it up. If on the other hand you're like me and you do a lot of hammer-ons, this is too high, that makes it really hard to do. So I like to have it as low as I can get it. It's, again, it's a balancing act, but you'll see stuff on company websites to be 3/64ths, or, you know, on the high side, and 4/64ths or 5/64ths on the low side. Some places will have you measure it at the 12th fret, some will have you measure it at the last fret. I've seen all of them, but the point is that you want to get it low enough that it's easy for you to play. You don't want to have to make too much work out of it, but high enough that you can still do bends and not have the strings buzz out on you when you go up the fretboard. So this for me is a good, it's a good place, and that's right around 1.5 millimeters at 17th fret. But this is just a guide. You know, do whatever works best for your style of playing. So now that I have got the nut right, I've got the neck relief right, I've got the action right, this thing is playing pretty good. The next thing to do to make sure it's playing in tune is to make sure the intonation is right. So these saddles here on most guitars will move back and forth. Some kinds of guitars the whole thing moves. This one's got individual saddles, so you've got a really wide range of adjustment. Some have less of it. Some of my arch tops, they've got just kind of wavy saddles on there, and you have to move the whole bridge back and forth. So that's a little bit of a give and take. Usually what I do is I find that you know, on bridges where I can move only the whole bridge, I try to get these two strings right, the high E and the low E. And if I get those right, then most of the rest of these will be in order somewhere. Something you see a lot of time on arch tops, and I was thinking I might have one here I could show you real quick, but on arch tops especially, sometimes you will have a bridge that is cut for a wound G, and this one is actually the string that has the biggest deflection in tune when you push down on it. So all of these strings, when you push them down from in tune, they go a little bit sharp because you're changing the tension on the string. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to line up where this fret sits in comparison to how much deflection is in the string so that it plays in tune. I've seen a lot of different guidelines on this that say you want this note to be this many frets or as many cents sharp of the harmonic at that fret. I like it just about right on. I play a lot of E and A and D shaped chords, or C and A and D shaped chords, and to me those really make a difference. You know, if you go hit that, or you go hit, it's hard to do this on the other side of the guitar, you go hit this and it's not in tune, I can really hear the difference, especially resonating against that open E. So I tend to tune the intonation so that this note on this harmonic and this fretted note are about the same. If you've got a good tuner, and I mean a tuner like a strobe tuner or a strobo stomp or something like that lets you do different temperaments, then the fastest way I've ever found to set intonation is to use one of those on the equal temperament setting, not guitar, because guitar is sweetened in different ways and will mislead you for intonation. Use guitar for tuning the thing like this. When you're tuning the intonation, you want to know the real note that's coming out, not a note that's been adjusted some percentage so that they think it sounds better. So I usually I've got a strobo stomp that I'll put up here when I'm doing intonation, and I will set it to equivalent or equal temperament. And then on this guitar, most guitars have some kind of a screw adjustment. Some of them will have a hex head, nut, a bolt. Some of them have flat head. This guitar, this Fender type here, has, I gotta put it in there, it has Phillips head screws. And the deal is that if you hit this and then you hit this, if this note, the fretted note, is sharp, then the saddle needs to move further away from the neck so that you're lessening the amount of deflection of the tuning when you push down on it. If it's flat, then what you do is you move the saddle in a little bit, and you kind of have to experiment, but usually tightening the screw pulls the saddle toward you, and loosening the screw pushes the saddle away. And you do every string like that, but don't do that until you have all of the rest of this right, because the neck relief will have a big impact on intonation, and the action absolutely will have a big impact on intonation. So you absolutely have to do them in those orders. You've got to do neck relief, then you've got to do action, then you've got to do the intonation. If you don't do them in that order, you just will never get them right. So that's about what I need to talk about today, and that was about this guitar. You know, when in doubt, if you don't know how to do stuff, take it to a shop or to a luthier that does. But you know, any good guitar player, I think, who considers himself a serious player, ought to be able to do some basic adjustments on his guitar. Don't fear the truss rod. The thing is with the truss rod, if it doesn't turn one way or the other, don't force it. You could have, you know, a frozen or rusted truss rod in here, and you can do more damage. But if this is working properly, and especially if you're dealing with fenders or stuff with maple necks, these almost never go wrong. So the thing is, just, you know, do a quarter turn or so at a time before you remeasure it. Again, there's a lot of misinformation that says, oh, you got to wait like 24 hours before you check it again, and that's nonsense. You know, again, these necks, especially on a modern guitar, they react pretty quickly, you know, instantaneously pretty much. Just, you know, turn it, measure it, turn it, measure it. I leave them at pitch. If you're having a real problem for some reason with trying to take out a back bow, you know, then you might need to mess with the tuning. But you're absolutely measuring, you know, the neck relief at pitch, strung up. So I don't think it makes any sense to detune, crank, tune back up. That's just a lot more work than you need. And again, unless there's something wrong with the truss rod, it will turn just fine even with the strings up to tension. So don't worry too much about that. You really can't go too wrong, but that should be about it. So remember, truss rod, well, get the nut right first. If it's not right, take it to somebody to do, unless you want to invest in a bunch of tools. And I always recommend trying this on a junk guitar or a piece of wood or something first to make sure you can actually do that before you ruin your guitar, and then you got to take it to the shop and look like an idiot. But once this is done, neck relief, action, intonation, and you should be all set to rock. So that's it for today. Thanks.